And welcome, class. This is episode 8 of the true and accurate history of Mongolia, Hanoi, when the walls fell. When we left off, the southern continent had been conquered, Genoa had fallen, Florence was under assault under the direction of Mongke Khan, Mongke Khan, his son, was in the New World, overseeing operations there. Genghis Khan was in the south, and Mongke Khan had also been arranging a series of cultural initiatives in the old continent now that he was officially in charge there. With Genghis Khan out of communication, Mongke Khan was taking every opportunity to put his own imprint on the Mongol nation, trying to soften it in ways that Genghis Khan would not approve of. This was because Mongke Khan, as we recall, was not a physically fit man. He was merely a very clever man. You can see him making his way up towards Florence there. He was smart enough to know, here at the turn of the century, that the Mongolian Empire would eventually run out of things to conquer. And at that point, if the martial obsession of the nation were not tempered in some way, it would decline, rot, putrefy. It would become untenable in the long run if they did not have some other focus for their energies. And in Mongke Khan's view, this focus was culture. You can see the ironclad making good use of its guns, even though it is restricted to the shallows. Genghis Khan moving over to Geneva, no doubt on his way to the New World, to help Mongke Khan with the conquest there. The ironclad is getting pretty hurt there and will need to move out of the way, but it held its own until the frigates could arrive and give Florence something else to shoot at. And the infantry has arrived as well, with Mongke Khan overseeing the conquest from a safe distance, as he is wont to do. So these cultural initiatives, the softening of the Mongol Empire, was something that would have greatly distressed Genghis Khan were he aware of it. And in fact, he was becoming more and more aware of it through rumors. Obviously, Mongke Khan was not advertising what he was doing, but soldiers crossing to the southern continent to join Genghis Khan's conquest, or who were being newly transferred, or the crews of frigates and other boats, were spreading rumors. And there we see 1905, the fall of Florence, and the old continent is completely secure. There is no one there who is not a part of the Mongol Empire now. But Mongke Khan had been removing the daily tournaments, which determined who deserved to live, who deserved to have strength and power, and had been, as we have been discussing, implementing the idea that it is possible to be capable in areas other than war. Now, this was a radical idea in the Mongol Empire, but something he found a lot of support with amongst the conquered peoples of Babylon, of India, and of the Ottoman Empire. Those conquered peoples still maintained a historic view. There you see Genghis Khan is making his way to the New World, up towards New Sarai. Still held this view that there were things worth doing other than fighting, as much as Genghis Khan may have disagreed. So Genghis was hearing of these changes, and at first did not want to believe them. Mongke Khan was his oldest surviving Khan, the first of his Khans, in fact, as the first explorer was not a Khan at all, as the system was not in place. Turfan was merely an explorer, a trusted lieutenant, a trusted general. So he did not want to believe that Mongke Khan would betray him and his beliefs in such a way. But the reports continued to come, continued to say that Mongke Khan was making these strange changes in how Mongolia was run, which was very troublesome. You can see here the troops making their way up to the New World with Genghis Khan. And a great artist was born, and Mongke Khan sent him over to the New World in an attempt to spread some culture there as well, and perhaps change Genghis Khan's mind about what he was doing in the Old World before he finally made a move and told Genghis Khan himself. Unfortunately, Genghis Khan, by this point, having reached the New World, was completely aware of what Mongke Khan was doing, and he was furious. He was full of rage, could not believe that Mongke Khan would betray him like that. And so he sent orders back to the Old World, ordering Mongke Khan to set out over the channel to Hanoi himself to oversee the battle from the front lines. He was ordered to go onto the front lines, something Mongke Khan did not often do himself. However, he knew that this was the only way he could possibly, perhaps, hope to regain Genghis Khan's trust and thereby move his cultural initiatives forward. And so he accepted those orders and moved himself across the channel to Hanoi, and this greatly weakened him. He was already, as we know, a physically unfit man, but the voyage across the channel in the midst of a war zone was a great stress on his body. It was something that caused him a great deal of discomfort. The frigates as well were focusing their fire on Hanoi rather than focusing their fire on the reinforcements, as was Genghis Khan's way, and as was Mongke Khan's way in usual. However, Mongke Khan was sick with the passage and was not able to give proper orders. He wasn't thinking properly. But this led to the first great tragedy of the Mongol Empire. Surrounded, Mongke Khan and his troops were attacked by Hanoi, and then struck from behind by the soldiers of Hanoi. The infantry were decimated, and Mongke Khan killed. It was the end of the cultural initiatives in the Old World. Mongke Khan fell, his remains were brought to the Great Pyramids at Babylon. It was the end of an era, the first great Khan to fall in battle. Genghis Khan would in time come to regret this, but at the time, now, he was simply too angry, too furious. He allowed his rage to dictate his actions, and as a result, he sent Mongke Khan to his death. The conquest of Hanoi continued apace all the same. The infantry who had killed Mongke Khan were destroyed by the now leaderless invasion force. In the southern continent, oil was discovered, as it was in the Old World, and Notre Dame was completed as well in Istanbul. The conquest of Hanoi continued, but it was slow work. There wasn't much room for soldiers there, and the infantry who were there lacked leadership and had to simply hold on and hope for the best. Fortunately, the frigates bombarded Hanoi just enough to let the soldiers in, and in 1917 Hanoi fell. A memorial was held for Mongke Khan there in Hanoi after his remains had been laid in state at the pyramids. It was a difficult time for the Mongol Empire. They had never lost a Khan before, and though most did not suspect that Genghis Khan had deliberately killed Mongke Khan, there were some few who knew the truth. At this point, around 1919, there wasn't a whole lot to do without engaging on a new naval conquest of the remaining city-states. But electricity was discovered in 1920, and this changed the way that war was carried out. New resources were discovered called aluminum. Oil began to be drilled for and pumped from the ground in all the world's all the lands held by the Mongol Empire, and the cavalry removed their horses and equipped themselves with a brand new weapon, the tank. This began a new age of warfare for the Mongols. The tank was heavily armored. It had powerful guns far outstripping the Woshindon rifle, and it is capable of rolling great distances through rough terrain, taking out even riflemen with ease. As the Keshik had in the early days of history, the tank would make the Mongols all but unstoppable. So armed, Genghis Khan began massing his troops along the border of the Iroquois Empire, preparing his next great conquest of a world culture. A golden age dawned with the advent of the tank, the people certain that they could not be stopped ever again. Not by the Iroquois, not by the Inca, not by the remaining city-states, not by anyone, alive, dead, or mythical. The frigates were upgraded to great destroyers, powerful ships with cannons equally as strong as those of the tanks. They had greater range, greater maneuverability, and far outstripped anything that the Iroquois or the Inca were capable of fielding at the time. The Mongols were in their element. The element of war, the element of superiority. They were unstoppable, and they knew it. Even so, Genghis Khan had to be careful. The Iroquois Empire was not large, but it was heavily defended. The Incan Empire was quite sprawling, but lacked the level of defense of the Iroquois. The technology was not quite as high. And here we can see the Inca are still spreading, hoping to cut off the Mongol Empire in the New World between Samarkand and New Sarai, hoping to build a barrier of cities and culture. Now, Genghis Khan wasn't pleased about this. However, he was willing to see what happened before he struck out. He had grown confident in his power, in his mastery of land and sea. He truly believed that there was no way that either of these empires could stand against him. We'll see more next time when the conquest begins. Until then, all the best.